Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm Sachin Mandot, your host for the podcast. With me, I have Varun Joshi right now. Varun is a data and AI expert currently based out of Australia. Varun, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sachin, and good evening to you. It's funny
Yeah.
how the
Good morning to you. We are
thank you.
poles apart. We are the
Yes, yes,
great north and you are the land down under.
yep. Down under. That's hello from down under to you,
Down
Sachin.
under, yeah. So Varun, quickly, if you want to give a bit of introduction of yourself to the audience who's going to listen to this.
Yeah, sure, Sachin. So I've been now working for the last 17 years in the IT industry, so I've lost track.
Yeah.
Times fly, and a majority of my time in those 17 years of experience, I would say maybe around 12 years plus, has been in the data and AI space. So earlier we used to call it analytics, we used to call it insight. So it's like the names have changed, and now the new buzzword is Gen AI. And I'm sure you're going to ask me a few
Yeah.
questions on that. But yeah, I've seen and
Bang
I've been
on.
fortunate enough to see that evolvement of from what it used to happen in the early 2000s and now in 2023.
Yeah. So you have been on the ring side seat of the whole evaluation. You
Yep.
would have sold RDBMS, RDBMS. Now you're
Yep.
selling Gen AI. So what's all the hype around Gen AI? If you want to speak about it from your lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Gen AI, and a lot of my friends keep on asking me this question because it's become such a buzzword right now, right? Gen AI. Everybody's talking about Gen AI. Even like non-technical friends of mine in the industry
And
keep
by
on
the way,
asking.
everyone, Gen AI is generative AI.
Yep.
For for
Yeah.
for starters, Gen AI is the short form for generative AI.
Yep, absolutely, and thanks, Sachin, for adding that. Right. So, look, the best way I explain this to my friends when they ask me this question, especially people who are not familiar with this topic, generative AI or Gen AI is actually the iPhone movement, as I would put it, right, in the space of data and AI, right. And it's best to give an analogy of the iPhone movement, right. So if you go back and look, I know a lot of young viewers would be watching it, but like I'm sure they would be aware in the 1980s, like early 80s, when we didn't have the good fortune of actually having a cell phone, we used to all wait for a trunk calls. There used to be like a common phone, and there used to be like 20 people. And then if you had a
Yeah.
call, you would have to kind of wait and you to record that, and you'll have 2 minutes and the phone would cut, right? And then fast forward a couple of years, you started having landlines on everyone's house. And then things matured. You used to have a cell phone, but very expensive, right? It used to cost you.
Yeah.
I remember in the 90s, the first mobile phone which my family member had, it was 25 rupees per minute. And in the 90s, it was, if I have to put that as an inflation right now, is 1,000 rupees a minute, right? So that's very
Yeah.
expensive. Converting in dollars is $20, Canadian or Australian, give or take. And then fast forward, you had your Samsung phones and iPhones, right? So things have evolved. And what has evolved is how easy and how accessible phones have now become, that anybody who doesn't understand the feature or technology, it could be a 70-year-old mom of mine, or it could be a 7-year-old son or daughter of mine, right? And they all can use it the same way. That's exactly how GenAI has done things to data analytics, right? So earlier, when we used to talk about data analytics, and I'll go back to the early 2000s, there used to be respectable softwares like SAS and SPSS, which
Yeah.
were very predominant, right? And the problem with that was that they were actually priced, so they were commercial products. What
They were
used to happen?
licensed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And data science that time was the sexiest job to have, because you were those select people who could actually understand like statistics and understand the coding language, and you used to develop models, and like you should be like some geeks sitting in the corner of any organization and actually doing it, right. And then there was an evolution where you started having a lot of self-service visualization. So you had MicroStrategy, Tableau, ClickView, which made the consumption of data in terms of numbers very easy, in terms of report charts. And then you went forward, and then R came in. So R actually was a path breaker, where you didn't need to buy licenses. You could actually do it as an open source, right? So open source
Yep.
came in big time. R, Python, Mahout. You had these databases like Cloudera, Houghton, which also came in. Things changed. And then what happened after that was that you had Databricks, Data IQ, Data Robots, so these platforms, which made it even more easier. I think Chat GPT has taken the level forward, right? Where, look, you don't need to code. You can consume things. You can actually have a sort of an assistant with you, right? And it could be anyone. It could be somebody who's working in a manufacturing plant who is actually there and he needs some questions. He's a plant operations head and he wants to ask a question, and there is an assistant helping that person out, right? Or
Yeah.
even if you want to probably code, you have an assistant for coding as well. So it's like taking it to a level where it has proliferated so much that anybody can consume or do things on AI. That's the best way to explain how Gen AI has evolved. It.
So we're seeing two use cases of GenAI. What do you say? First is like a chat expert. So basically, you have a question, you go to
Yep.
them, and they answer your question.
Yep.
Uh, Second is I'm forgetting the second one. It just flew off my mind.
So the two use cases I gave you, one was the assistant, and the second
Yeah,
one is also Gen AI has, like, and there are multiple use cases, but one of the use cases where you could actually put in your code, and
yeah.
there's a code
The
assistant.
co-pilot. Yeah,
Correct. Yes. So which can correct your syntaxes, help you with logic. Sometimes it can, like, because it's self-serving and feeding, it can actually help you code as well. So it's
yeah.
a code
So
assistant for, yeah.
I s- I've seen two or three other use cases. So for example, for editing images right now, what do you
Yep.
think? Or creating videos. But are there use cases which you are seeing on a daily basis, which the normal public does not see? Like, for example, creating images, videos, chat, that's great. But apart from that, what's happening behind the scenes in the big industrial corporations? What are they doing with Gen AI?
That's a really great question, Sachin. And to be very transparent with you, while this is a very good kind of a path breaker for the entire industry, right now what has happened is a lot of thought process is happening towards discovering those use cases. So look, I can give you certain examples. Let's say, like, let's take an example of a banking industry. So one of the
Yeah,
top banks in Australia, we are helping them out with, like, a customer journey for home lending. So home lending buyers were actually coming on the platform, and usually there are a lot of questions being asked via, let's say, the call center, or via, let's say, their agent on the portal itself, right? But then a lot of times you don't get those answers because they will just give you, and if you ever tried using an assistant or a portal,
yeah,
any of the platforms, it's very basic. It will not give
yeah,
you a lot of data, right? So that's where a lot of thought process is going, is how we can make it as intelligent as a human. So it's like you're actually interacting with a human. It has all the data available, but it's not a human. It's actually a Gen AI bot in the backend, right? So
yeah,
use cases are getting towards that. Have they moved to production? Are they actually live? Few of them are. I would say we are in that, the Gartner hype cycle. So we are in that cycle where, look, it's a very hot topic and it's getting into production, getting live in that scenario. And a lot of time is being spent actually with the client in terms of discussing use cases. Use cases are actually being drawn from the individual customer journey maps. So where are those use cases, or the I would say the practical use of Gen AI, as you rightly mentioned, stuff around your co-pilots. That's the strongest use
yeah.
case. That's one part of it. Editing your audios, videos in terms of intelligence. You're helping them out on code assistance, looking at stuff around the predictive analytics part as well. That's very strong. But what we are trying to do is map those Gen AI to actual customer journey mappings, and then figuring out what could be the actual ideal use case for that particular client.
Okay. So I think predictive analytics existed before this, but then it has not been productionized in that bigger scale.
Yep. And I'll give you, I'll probably elaborate on this, right? So maybe I'll just try to use these terms and then explain you, right? So there is supervised learning and there is unsupervised learning. So when supervised
Okay.
learning is, basically, it's very, very simple in layperson terms. There is an input coming in, right? It's like a factory, right? So
Yeah.
there's an input coming in, there's a model which is feeding in, there's a logic which has been fed in, and the output
Yeah.
is your reports, or output could be those actual data science stuff, right? So what was happening before from a predictive analytics capability is that all the code or logic of that factory, which is actually a model, was fed in, right? So there was no self-learning capabilities or unsupervised learning capabilities of that model itself, right?
Model
So
itself.
you would have a predictive model. It was a supervised learning model, as we call it. So you put in data, you would have a logic or an algorithm running towards it. Ultimately, at the backend, it's like, if you learn C programming, it's actually your what if, for loops, etc., in the backend running, and then giving you an output. Now what is the expectation from Gen AI is unsupervised learning. So where you go to a stage where the model itself could also probably see, maybe if, like, one of the outputs is giving me a 99.5% accuracy and a different algorithm is giving 99.7, I should switch to 99.7 without a human or a manual loop stating that you should perform that way. That's where the north star of Gen AI is, where unsupervised learning becomes very mature. Are we there? I would say we are in that path. There are certain, let's say, use cases where we are there, but certain use cases we are still evolving.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. So, coming on to this topic, when you said about the Gartner hype cycle, and for
Yeah.
people who do not know what Gartner hype cycle is, Gartner is an analyst which publishes state of the latest technologies and where they are. So it's a cycle where it's an initial excitement, then mass adoption, all of that. So you feel that right now it's a hot topic, and we might see a slump before actually getting it into a day in and day out use.
Yep, absolutely, Sachin. So maybe again, I'll give you one more example. So I was fortunate enough to attend the Microsoft World Tour AI event in
Okay.
Sydney. Coming back to what I observed from the Microsoft World Tour AI event in Sydney, right? So they were very heavy on Copilot, which is Microsoft Copilot product. Um, you could probably
And
just
what
look
does
at Google.
Copilot do for people who are listening it for the first time? What does Copilot do?
So as a name or the term reflects, right? So co-pilot. So like suppose let's say you
Yeah.
are your pilot in journey. Co-pilot is like your assistant, right? So in terms of
Yeah.
assisting you in a lot of things, that's the simplest way to explain a layperson. So in terms of co-pilot is looking at your use case or stuff, where it could be like a partner in crime for you, trying to help you things out, right? That's the best way
Like
to
maybe
explain.
me writing code, it can help me generate some
Yes,
syntax, or
correct. So
me
code
writing
assistant.
document.
Correct. Code assistant could be one of them. A lot of the legal counsels. So maybe one more use case for you is a lot of legal counsels. They go through a ton of contracts and documents and SOWs, and there are certain keywords or certain stuff which they want to really observe, etc. Like you can have a legal co-assistant as well, where like you can frame some rules.
Yeah.
Says, look, hey, can you? I'm working on this particular SOW, a statement of work or a case. Can you check on these things and tell me what happened on this day? And it's like the
Yeah.
co-pilot of.
So they do not have to go through the trouble of reading everything.
Correct. Absolutely. So there's a lot of work, especially manual repetitive work, where there's requirements like your human way of thinking. It's easy for them, right? Because that's the basic senses of a human. So basic sense of a human is reading through it and finding keywords, etc. That's something I would say, like your GenAI has mastered it, right? Where it could really quickly do things and give you those reports, etc. Right? So what Microsoft has done fantastically well is merge Copilot with a lot of their tool stacks. So they've merged with your PowerPoint. They merged it with stuff on your Microsoft 365, which is your Teams. So to give you an example, let's say we are on a Teams call right now. We're actually not on Teams call,
Yeah.
but we are actually on a call right now. And let's
Yeah.
assume that I had a Microsoft Teams call which I had to attend, and I can't attend it. So what I could do is I could use that GenAI assistant of Microsoft Teams and tell them that, look, I can't attend it. Can you give me a synopsis of the meeting at the end? And can you give me the action items on me or others in the meeting? So what it would do
Yeah.
is actually like listen through the meeting, and at the end of the meeting, it will give me a like maybe a 2 paragraph synopsis of what actually happened, because that's the only time any one of us have in our busy times, giving you okay what's happened in the meeting, and also give you specific action items. Or it could be a scenario where you're actually in the meeting and you need some data quickly, and that data resides, let's say, with your other databases, RDBMS or like stuff out there.
Yeah.
Live in that meeting, you could ask saying, look, can you give me the data? Because let's assume like you're a like a CXO stakeholder in a meeting, and you're discussing stuff, and you want to know more, right? Because you want to like take decisions back on data, and sometimes look, you can't wait for somebody to produce that Tableau report or Power BI report for you, but on that fly you want some more inputs, and you can just quickly ask the co-pilot questions, and you'll get those things on the fly. And actually this is not just numbers or stats, it could actually produce a Power BI report for you. which was amazing and was mind blowing. So I was very impressed, and I'm sure like
So you're sitting
others.
in that presentation that
Yeah.
Microsoft did.
Yes.
Wow. So the
Yeah.
junior most guy of the team does not have to do that work anymore.
Correct. So
They
it's
do
like,
not have to do notes.
nah, absolutely. So look, that's where the beauty is, right? Where it's becoming so quick, right? And again, going back to my example, and when we used to use phone before, we used to use phone only for calling and SMS. And now
Yeah.
phone is seldom used for actually calling. You spend most of your time surfing, right? Or using some like apps. That's exactly how data and insights is going to be, right? So most of the time you used to spend on actually finding the data, massaging the data quality, right? And maybe producing reports. Now things would be changing, right? So majority of the time, and which is good for the business, right? You'll be spending time in actually deriving insights and taking decisions, and that's where the journey is going forward, and that's why it's a beautiful journey from a how we see it from GenAI perspective.
Wow. So now that we've heard about GenAI, that there are the use cases, how does someone make a career in this? Since it's new, so there are a lot of career pathway that would be opening up in this. So
Yep.
what are different career options that you think people can pursue?
Again, that's a great exam, like great question, right? And look, what I mentioned to you earlier, if you had asked me this question 20 years back, I would say, become a data scientist, right?
Yeah.
Now, you don't need to be a data scientist, right? Uh, I think the skills required now is to be an all rounder. That's how I would put it, right? So, look, you need to understand a bit of data, right? At least the
Okay.
foundation elements, etc. And from a programming perspective, look, if anybody is logical, right, in terms of how things operate, a logical thought process, understanding of data, but a lot of focus has to be now on the functionalities, like in terms of okay, like what does, let's say if you're going to be working in GenAI and working for a bank, like do you understand operations, do you understand risk and compliance? A lot of focus now will actually now go back to the actual core domain which you want to operate to, because now the backend has become very easy for you. So your backend is actually your GenAI things, where now there's life is easy. Now the focus is more going to be back now on the actual usage, or like the domain, or the business knowledge of it. So I would say
We,
need all rounders. 70% has to be now on the business knowledge and understanding of the domain. 30% would be maybe a bit of logical thinking along with data.
so Varun, we talked about Gen AI impact use cases and the jobs that are going to be important with Gen AI. But there is also fear amongst people that there would be job losses due to Gen AI. Like, what do you think of that since you've been seeing this journey through very close lens?
No, thanks Sachin for bringing this up, right? And it's a pretty prevalent question. It's actually going in a lot of minds, right? And look, I would take inspiration from like what I saw. Narayan Murthy was actually asked this question, right? And I was actually seeing his interview, and the way he answered it is, and obviously he's much more senior than any one of us. He's seen this industry since the 1980s, and what he said is, when the computers came in, like for people who are young viewers, there were typewriters which were used before, right? And there was no computers before typewriters. And when computers came, people said, "Look, okay, everybody's going to lose their jobs. Computers are coming, and look, it's going to be a complete evolution, and like it's going to be a lot of the technology being used." Now, we still see that there's ample number of jobs in the market which has gone from the 1990s till now, right? And why it has happened is because it was not that it was a scenario of job loss. It was a scenario of a different skill set being applied to the industry, and the expectation was that like people like us get upskilled to use that, and that's how I see Gen AI as well. Now with Gen AI, we need to kind of upskill ourselves, and like going back to your question, like the skill sets required are more all-rounders now, right? When earlier focus was okay, let's get your technology, let's do your engineering, let's get your coding stuff and become like a hardcore data scientist. Now the expectation is, look, you need to know data, but you also need to know the domain, you need to know the business, etc. So that's the good mix which you need for being relevant in the industry.
What you're going to use Gen AI for? Like that's going to be more important. Like,
Spot
what
on,
can you do
spot
better
on.
in your own
iPhone
industry?
moment. Right? You need to know how to use the iPhone and the features rather than just going to details of features. Exactly right. That's how it's going to be. So look, short answer is I would not say that like there's going to be massive job losses. I would say you need a different skill set, and yes, you need to kind of upskill yourself, evolve, accept, and get to that level, right? Otherwise, you're going to just fall flat. So, look, my advice would be accept, embrace Gen AI. It's going to be there. It's going to be here to stay. Pick up skill sets which are going to really make you more relevant to the leverage or use of Gen AI.
Okay. So thanks, Varun, for answering my questions here. And I hope people listening to this find a value to this session that we did.